So what this brings us to is what I call a new playbook for strategy. And this is where agility really becomes critically important, because there are 6 elements that I think are different than the way we used to think about strategy. The first one really is agility, and I rather clumsily called it continuous reconfiguration. But what that basically means is you're in motion. So if you think about running a long distance, right? If you're already in motion, it's much easier to keep going. If you have to start from a standing stop, it requires much more energy to get going. So being in motion, and what I've observed in my research is that companies that make lots of continual small changes adjust over time, and they can avoid making those big, wrenching, sort of fire the left-hand side of the building changes. So we're going from this notion of stability as the normal thing and change as the weird thing to continuous change, continuous small change, non-disruptive change as something that's much more normal. And in fact, I've got a Harvard Business Review article coming out this summer looking at how you actually meet disruption. And everybody always talks about, oh, disrupt or be disrupted. It's gotten to be kind of a cliche now. And what we found when we studied firms that actually do this is the ones that are continually investing in small changes and small experiments and small things. When the disruption comes, it doesn't feel like a disruption because they've been doing it all along. So a great example of this is Nike. And back in 1987, Nike had this idea that runners, and that's of course their core market, runners, would really want to get some information about their run. How fast were they going and how much energy did it take, and what data could we give a runner that would help inform their running habits. And they invented this thing called the Nike, before the fuel band, it was called the Nike Motion, I think it was called. And this was, now imagine, this was a thing you strapped around your waist, and there was kind of a cigarette box, carton-sized thing, which had sensors that pointed at the ground, and then it had earbuds, which didn't play music. They just gave you information about how fast you were going and everything. And they thought, information to the runner, this is going to be great. Well, runners took one look at this kludgy thing. And there were a few that were fanatical enough that was of use, but it was definitely never going to make it to the mainstream. But the idea of providing data to runners didn't really die with them. They kept that alive. And years later, what they noticed on their campus in Oregon was that the runners that were running there were actually wearing iPods. And that was the first time you had the ability to have all your songs in your pocket. You could come up with a playlist and you could run to it. And they said, aha. And so Phil Knight called up his buddy, Steve Jobs, and said, let's talk. And out of that initiative came Nike Plus. And what Nike Plus was in its early days was pretty primitive by today's standards. It would collect the data on your iPod with a special transponder. So Nike did the transponder part and Apple did the programming part. And when you synced your music, and remember, back in the day, you had to plug your iPod into a computer to get it to put the music on it. My kids look at me as though I've crawled out from under a rock when I say things like that. I'm like, this was 2003, people. This was not like 1,000 years ago. Anyway, so what it would do is it would sync your data, your running data, to a central database. And you could get reports on it, you could compare yourself to other people, and you could look at over a year what you did. And this turned out to be incredibly popular. Well, fast forward to today, Nike Plus now has over 135 members, so direct to consumer. It's the core of Nike's direct consumer strategy. It has been a revolution in how retailers have done business, so this sort of direct to consumer thing. But it didn't happen overnight, and it didn't feel like, oh my God, we've got to make this sharp left turn. They'd been working on it since the 80s. And I think that's the principle of this sort of continuous reconfiguration, constantly experimenting.